Here we go. This is Kinesiology 230, Chapter 13. This is Presentation 1. For this chapter, there's a ton about strength training and resistance training. I got to tell you, a lot of this is going to be pretty straightforward stuff if you're a gym person already. I'm going to go ahead and work through a lot of it, but I'm going to ask you to spend a little time and maybe go in and look at some of the exercise and exercise descriptions. Though you're not heavily tested on it, it has its place to talk about, I'm sorry, it has its place for you to know so you can talk about exercise when you're in an environment training people. Okay, so some of the main takeaways here are comprehend fundamental techniques for performing and instructing proper form and resistance training. A lot of this you see in our Kinesiology 214, where we actually have hands on and we partner up and we work out a lot together and we train each other. And then describe proper spotting techniques as well as situations when they are needed, define appropriate training equipment and apparel, and then recognize some common resistance exercise technique errors. So a lot of what I'm doing for this series of presentations for chapter 12 is I'm going to just take cut and paste from the book and put them right in our slides. So it's pretty easy to follow along. They have these main categories regarding types of resistance training equipment. It's a constant resistance through a range of motion, ROM, variable resistance throughout a range of motion, and then there's a constant speed of contraction during a range of motion. Let's talk a little bit about these as we go ahead and move me over here. So with machines, right, you have different machines are made by different manufacturers, and the different manufacturers have different patents on their machines, and the different machines will be either for single joint or multi-joint purposes. And when you look at the different machines, oftentimes because of the way the equipment's made, it has a restricted and controlled plane of movement, plane of motion here as it's written. But the point I want to make is when you start doing selectorized equipment, usually on a continuum of risk, most people associate selectorized equipment being the least risky to an individual. And I can tell you that if you have somebody who has perhaps a pre-existing condition, an orthopedic concern, etc., when you work out with that individual, machines are made out of wood and steel, and if anything in the equation is vulnerable and is going to give or break, it's going to be the person using it. So I would urge you to just be aware of the person that you're putting on a piece of selectorized equipment, just to make sure you're not putting them at peril. And the whole concept of selectorized equipment, it has its place within the context of working out. And there's many different types of machines per se, and selectorized being one of them, which is very similar to some of the other pieces you see to the right: plate loaded, cam, rod and linear, hydraulic, air pneumatic, and isokinetic. And oftentimes people will just say, I'm going to do a machine workout today, and it'd be any one of those different modalities that you see there. So they're oftentimes equated with a higher degree of safety because of the fact that they are self-spotting. A person can just stop doing the exercise and a weight's not going to fall on their head. And the exercises themselves are great for people who are just starting out, and they're also great for people who are well conditioned into strength training, and perhaps maybe they want to do something just a little bit different than bang and hang with some weights. All right, so when you look at this, you have the ability to go ahead and do strength training with selectorized equipment denoted here up in your white. You have cables and pulleys, and the point I want to make out is it's the weight stack that is being affected by gravity. That's being pulled straight down to the floor, and the weight stack itself is the actual mechanism that is causing the resistance. Now, what happens though is that resistance slides up and down two tracks here, or two bars. In this case, it could be two rods for this example. And the weight slides up and down, but it slides down because you have the weight stack is attached to a cable, and the cable runs over a series of pulleys. That's what these guys over here. And those pulleys redirect the resistance to the end user who is holding a bar, a handle, some type of apparatus to do the exercise. Now, what I want to point out is selectorized equipment redirects the load, and it's a redirection of load over or through the cable across the pulleys themselves. So to that end, when you're working with clients, you may see a piece of equipment. Life Fitness has this cable crossover contraption, And when you look at it, you look at the weights and the math, the math's not mathing because it might be 37 and a half or 25 and a half on the stack, but it feels a lot more like 55 pounds. And what ends up happening is some of the configurations that you have with like a multi-station setup, like a light fitness piece of equipment, there's a couple other ones as well, like Techno Gym does this as well. You have this resistance that's being offered from a weight stack and it's being offered over a set of pulleys, but the handle and the pulley itself slides up and down a track. So because it slides up and down a track, and you can do a tricep push down or a bicep curl, just depending where you put the pulley, you have pulleys that are involved. Now, pulleys are simple machines that are used to cut weight. If you put several pulleys in succession, it can cut the weight on the order of half to quarter to eighth, whatever the actual weight is being moved. So you got to understand when you look at selectorized equipment and you look at the pulley configurations, it matters, especially when you're working with your clients. And you may be called to action to be able to describe to your client, well, this is going over several pulleys and this is listed at 37 and a half. It doesn't feel like 37 and a half does over on that piece of equipment over there because of the pulley configuration, and also perhaps it's the exercise you're doing. Maybe a one-arm standing row is going to feel different than a one-arm bicep curl at the same weight because one's a multi-joint, one's a single joint. I digress. Let's go ahead and go back into the presentation here. And when you look at plate-loaded, plate-loaded hammer strength was one of the pioneers in this area. And here's a seated row where you're seated, you have the handles and you're facing to the right in this picture, and you have these weights on the bottom, you load them on. So it's plate loaded, meaning you're loading the actual weightlifting plates on the piece of equipment. What you have to understand about this equipment, whether it's the row or the chest press or whatever exercise it may be, you're loading plates onto a bar down here and you're pulling on the handle. That handle is attached to almost like a triangular in shape pivot point, which is back over here. So the pivot point matters. So as you're pulling back and doing your row, what happens is the weight actually goes up in a curvilinear movement pattern. And that curvilinear movement pattern is what actually causes the weight, the person to feel the weight increase. So here's my point to you. As you go through a range of motion, there's a curvilinear actual movement to the weight. You'll feel very little weight when it's down here in the start position. And as you pull up, you'll feel greater weight as you pull up, 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 until the actual handle or the bar is at or perpendicular to the floor. So realize when you do this equipment, because of the curvilinear movement pattern of the weight, it's going to dictate how the resistance feels. Now, I do have this next slide here where we're talking about cam-based machines. And with cam-based machines, cam-based machines are a little different animal because the actual load itself doesn't change through the range of motion. But what happens is because of this kidney-shaped cam that the cable goes over, very much you see this on leg curl and leg extension machines, because of the shape of that cam, it changes how the resistance feels, even though the weight stays the same. And there was a company years ago named Strive, and Strive had a contraption where they had a cam, but you could actually use a handle and change the position of the cam so that kidney shape was different. And you could have it on one set, another set, or another set, or you could subdivide and do, 5 out of 15, 5 out of 15, 5 out of 15, because what happened at that point is even though the load would stay the same, it would feel different to the muscle through a range of motion. And, anytime you have a curvilinear movement pattern, and we talked about using like elastomers or any kind of selectorized cable crossover equipment, you're doing rotational exercise, how you position yourself relative to where the resistance is being redirected to you by the final pulley to the handle matters, and it'll change how it feels to the actual body itself. And it's another conversation for another presentation. But just realize what you're doing in that scenario is you're just making yourself a human cam, and you're changing your position relative to the tie-off point, which might be 90 degrees, or you might be a closed stance or an open stance relative to where that resistance is being tied off to my right. And it's the same concept, but just understand cams change how resistance feels. Rod or linear guided, you see these in almost every gym. The one to the left is referred to as a Smith machine. The Smith machine has little hooks on it. And when you go ahead and pick the weight up, you have to pick it up and rotate it. You pick it up and rotate it with your hand. So oftentimes you have to guide your clients to kind of be over rotated a little bit. So when they pick it up and pull it back, they're in a comfortable position to do their chest press or squats or shoulder press. But the actual bar itself that's here travels up and down these guide rods that are on either side. More often than not, the bar itself is provided or utilized as a counterweight mechanism. So it's not a 45-pound bar, though you might put, a 45 on each side, and in your head you're thinking it's 135. It's not. It's actually closer to probably like 100, maybe, somewhere in there. There's usually some kind of sticker or some kind of sticker or information piece on there that tells you actually how much the bar is. Now, I have to tell you, from a math standpoint, whether it's this or you're doing a leg press where you're sliding the sled up and down, you're sliding that up and down rails, I just tend to look at it and I count, even though this might be 85 pounds and this might be 35 pounds, I just count it at 45 pounds because in my head, I'm so accustomed to doing 3 plates, 315, 3 plates with a 25 on each side is 365. I can just kind of rattle those numbers off in my head. So I just equate this to being a 45-pound bar and a 45-pound bar. And if I have 5 plates on, I know it's 495 or 485, whatever the number is, or 2 plates is 225. It's just something I know from years of working out, and it makes my life a lot easier trying to remember these things. Hydraulic machines. You'd see hydraulic machines in a couple different settings, but it's fluid or oil. It's oil or water within like a piston or a cylinder to achieve resistance. Now, what ends up happening is the faster you smush that, the more equal and opposite reaction you get out of the fluid itself. So you end up having this scenario where it has to be a controlled tempo. And then the other thing is, because you have pistons being moved and there's fluid dynamics involved, it ends up being a concentric only type movement pattern. And that's just the nature of hydraulics. Let's go ahead and look at like a circuit that you'd see like in a curve from years ago, or there's a couple other newer ones that are out now that are purporting to be the next best thing for curves, where they have a circuit in place and it's all oil-based or water-based hydraulics with air. Same idea as hydraulic, it's just air is the resistance mechanism. And with these and the way they're set up, usually it's a one plane of motion type of activity. There's a pivot point, you're moving the handle, but it's against air. Now, the thing is that pressurized air, when you look at it, and HER is one of them, and we use HER in the place I'm employed full time. You have a great piece of equipment, and it's wonderful to be able to do like 2 different exercises, perhaps like a leg curl and leg extension on one piece of equipment, just with a flick of a switch. But the thing is, you have this air compressor that sits in a room, and every once in a while the thing kicks on like somebody's putting in a new wood floor in your house. And you guys have to sit through the background noise of an air compressor compressing to be able to service the pieces of equipment that are over here. Still great equipment, nice and smooth. And it's a little bit more responsive than like the hydraulic as well. Isokinetic machines, you often see like isokinetic machines in this type of environment, a very clinical environment. And usually this is what people think of with isokinetics. And isokinetic meaning when you're doing an exercise, the speed of the contraction is held constant throughout the given range of motion. And oftentimes with isokinetics, you'll see both eccentric, concentric loading, or you'll see antagonistic muscle groups that are being used. So you have push to one side, pull on the way back down, leg extension, leg curl. It just kind of depends on the manufacturer and a piece of equipment. But isokinetic, it ends up being controlled by a computer, and you can program in what you'd like to do in terms of the actual range of motion. And as I noted, it's concentric and eccentric resistance, right? So it's something where you can actually program that in to hit both phases. So it's something you see in a clinical environment or a laboratory environment because of its cost, and also just because of its awkwardness of having to use a computer console. All right, guys, with that, signing off, moving to the next one.